Here's a question that nobody in football ever seems to ask. If you asked 100 football fans to name the greatest Brazilian player of all time, the greatest ever, virtually every single one of them would say the same name: Pelé. And I'm not here to tell you Pelé was bad. He wasn't. He was extraordinary. But I am here to tell you that Pelé himself, on multiple occasions, said that the greatest player he ever shared a pitch with was not himself. It was a bow-legged, illiterate kid from a shack in the Amazon rainforest who walked into a football club at age 14 and was almost turned away because the doctor said his legs were medically unsuitable for sport. That player's name was Garrincha. And if you don't know that name, if that name doesn't make you feel anything, then what I'm about to tell you in this video is going to genuinely disturb you. Because the story of why Garrincha has been erased from the center of football's greatest ever conversation is not an accident. It is a story about race, about class, about addiction, and about how football history has always been written by the powerful, not by the people who actually played the game. Stay with me. This one matters. His full name was Manoel Francisco dos Santos. He was born in 1933 in Pau Grande, a tiny factory town about 70 kilometers from Rio de Janeiro. His family was desperately poor. His father was an alcoholic. His mother died young. And when Manoel was born, something was already different. His spine was curved. His left leg bent inward at the knee. His right leg bent outward. From a standing position, his legs formed a shape that no doctor in 1933 thought could ever run, let alone play football. His sister gave him a nickname, Garrincha. In Portuguese, it means little wren, a small, fragile bird. The name stuck, because even as a child, everyone could see there was something bird-like about him, something small and delicate that somehow, impossibly, flew. When he was a teenager, Garrincha walked into Botafogo Football Club in Rio. The club doctor examined him and wrote in his report, and I'm quoting here, that this young man's physical deformities made him medically unfit to play professional football. The youth team coach read the report. Then he watched Garrincha play for 10 minutes, and he ignored the doctor completely. Because what he saw on that training pitch in 1953 was something that had no medical category and no reasonable explanation. Garrincha, with his mismatched crooked legs, was unguardable. Let me try to explain what made Garrincha different. And I want to be careful here, because statistics don't do it justice. Garrincha played primarily as a right winger, and his weapon was the dribble. Specifically, a type of dribbling that defenders of his era described as humiliating. Not difficult, humiliating. Here's why. Because of the angle at which his right leg was set, Garrincha could position the ball in a way that made it physically impossible for a defender to know which direction he was going. The natural pivot point of his ankle didn't operate the way a normal ankle did. It created a dribbling motion that looked like a glitch in reality. He would approach a defender at full speed. The defender would commit, and Garrincha would not go either way. He would do something in between, a feint that wasn't a feint, a cut that defied geometry, and the defender would find themselves on the floor, having lunged at a ghost. He did this consistently, against the best defenders in the world, for 15 years. And here's the thing that I find almost philosophically interesting about Garrincha. He didn't think about what he was doing. In interviews, Garrincha was asked repeatedly to describe his technique, how he beat defenders, what he was looking for, what his plan was. He couldn't answer. Not because he was being coy, but because he genuinely didn't know. He said, and this is a rough translation, "I just play. The ball tells me what to do." Pelé was a genius who worked. Garrincha was something else entirely. He was a force of nature that happened to be wearing football boots. Now let's talk numbers, because this is where the Garrincha conversation gets genuinely uncomfortable for the official football history. Garrincha played 50 international matches for Brazil between 1955 and 1966. Brazil's record in those 50 games? Won 47, lost 0. Let me say that again. Garrincha played 50 matches for his country and never once ended on the losing side. Not 50 wins. Garrincha occasionally missed games through injury, but in every single match where Garrincha put on a Brazil shirt and played, Brazil did not lose. That is statistically extraordinary. That is arguably the single most remarkable individual playing record in the history of international football. Now, Pelé. Pelé played 92 international matches for Brazil. He was on the losing side multiple times. Brazil were knocked out of the 1966 World Cup with Pelé in the group stage. I'm not citing this to diminish Pelé, I'm citing it to make one point. When people say Pelé is football's greatest player, and they base that claim partly on his international career, they are ignoring the player whose international record is factually superior. 1958 World Cup, Brazil's first. Garrincha and Pelé both played. Pelé was 17, brilliant, scored 6 goals including a hat-trick in the semi-final. Justifiably celebrated. What most people don't know, Garrincha was equally decisive. He was the player who destroyed the Soviet Union in the group stage. He was the dribbling engine that Brazil's system depended on. The partnership between Garrincha on the right and Pelé through the middle was the most devastating combination in the tournament. Brazil won. Both men were essential. Now, 1962 World Cup, Chile. Pelé plays the first 2 games. Brazil win both. Then, in the second game, Pelé tears a muscle in his groin. He is done for the tournament. What happens next is one of the most extraordinary individual tournament performances in World Cup history, and it is almost never discussed. With Pelé sidelined, Brazil, the defending champions, face a crisis. Their squad is excellent, but Pelé is Pelé. Losing him should, by any logic, weaken the team severely. What actually happened was the opposite. Garrincha, freed from sharing the creative responsibility, became something terrifying. Against England in the quarter-final, the country that invented the sport, Garrincha was, by any serious assessment, the greatest individual display by a single player at any World Cup up to that point. He scored, he created. He tortured England's defence so completely that English players were reportedly in shock at full time. Against Chile in the semi-final, Garrincha scored twice, including a trademark free-kick curler, and was so dominant that the Chilean crowd, his opponents, began applauding him mid-game. Brazil won the tournament. Pelé didn't play a single knockout match. Garrincha was named Player of the Tournament. Let me be very precise about what that means. The greatest single player at the 1962 World Cup, the individual prize given to the best player of the entire competition, went to a man whose name the average football fan today would struggle to place. Not Pelé, not a Pelé understudy, Garrincha. And here's where it gets strange. In 1962, the Golden Ball, the World Cup's Best Player award, was technically awarded to nobody. FIFA didn't formally give out the individual award that year. The tournament committee named Garrincha the outstanding player informally. Retroactively, football historians credit him with the honour. But there's something almost poetic and almost suspicious about the fact that the one World Cup where Garrincha was inarguably, statistically, empirically the best player on the planet is also the one World Cup where the formal records are the most ambiguous. So why doesn't anyone talk about Garrincha? I want to give you 4 reasons, and I want to be honest with you. Some of them are uncomfortable. Reason 1, he was poor, black, and from the interior. The football world of the 1950s and 60s was not a meritocracy of memory. The players who got written into history prominently were those who were marketed, promoted, and valorized by institutions, clubs, media, commercial interests. Garrincha came from nothing. He had no education. He was functionally illiterate for most of his adult life. He had no commercial representation. He had no one managing his legacy. Pelé, who also came from poverty, was younger, more articulate, more commercially attractive, and became the player that Brazil's football apparatus decided to build around as a national symbol. This was not entirely fair, but it was the reality. Reason 2, his life outside football was chaotic. Garrincha struggled profoundly with alcoholism throughout his career, and especially after it ended. He had multiple children by multiple women, financial chaos, and a deeply turbulent personal life. The football establishment, And later, the media found it easier to tell the clean, triumphant story of Pele than the messy, human story of Garrincha. History tends to lionize the marketable. Garrincha was not marketable. He was real. Reason 3. He retired before the global broadcast era. Garrincha's peak years, 1958 to 1964, existed in black and white, in grainy film reels, in an era before satellite television made football a genuinely global spectacle. Pelé, crucially, was still playing in 1970, the first World Cup broadcast in colour, to a global audience. The 1970 Brazil team became the most watched and most replayed team in football history, with Pelé was at its centre. Garrincha, by 1970, was retired, alcoholic, and largely forgotten. The medium chose the legend. Reason 4. He died young and poor. Garrincha died in 1983 at the age of 49 from cirrhosis of the liver caused by alcoholism. He died in poverty. There was no farewell tour, no global tributes, no sponsored legacy campaign. Pelé died in 2022 at 82, a global icon worth hundreds of millions of dollars, with every major institution in world football celebrating his life. The difference in how we remember them is not only a difference in greatness, it is a difference in infrastructure, in privilege, and in who gets to control the narrative of their own legacy. I want to end this section with something Pelé actually said, because if you don't believe me, maybe you'll believe him. Pelé said in an interview, and I'm paraphrasing accurately, "Garrincha was the most complete player I ever saw. When Garrincha was well and not injured, he was simply the best." He also said, "I was the greatest Brazilian player, except for Garrincha." Read that sentence again. Pelé, the man the entire world calls the greatest footballer who ever lived, exempted one person from that claim. One person, Garrincha. And the world's response was essentially to ignore that, to continue the Pelé narrative as if that quote didn't exist. Because the Pelé brand was too large, too economically important, too deeply embedded in the identity of football itself, to allow a complication. Garrincha was the complication. So, was Garrincha better than Pelé? Here's my honest answer. I think better is the wrong word. Because Pelé was a complete, extraordinary footballer who had a sustained, brilliant career over 15 years and genuinely transformed the sport. But I think Garrincha, at his peak, was the most devastating individual player who ever lived. I think the 1962 World Cup belongs to him. I think those 50 unbeaten international appearances are the most remarkable individual record in the history of international football. And I think the fact that he is not a household name, that you can play football quiz night for 3 hours and never hear his name, is one of the most significant distortions in football's historical memory. The history of football has been written mostly by Europeans and mostly for a market that wanted clean, commercial narratives. Garrincha, bow-legged, joyful, chaotic, brilliant, tragic Garrincha was too strange, too poor, too human for that story. But he played the game with his soul. He played it like a child who had never been told there were rules. And in 50 games for the country he loved, wearing yellow and green, he never lost. Not once. If that doesn't deserve to sit at the centre of football's greatest ever conversation, I genuinely don't know what does. If this video changed how you think about football history, that's exactly why this channel exists. Every week, we go back into football's past and find the stories that the mainstream never tells you, the myths that aren't myths, the legends that aren't legends, and the forgotten people who deserve to be remembered. Subscribe, hit the bell, and tell me in the comments. Did you know who Garrincha was before this video? I genuinely want to know. See you next week.